And now, marine weather around Alaska. Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaskan marine weather coming up here for the next couple of days. Taking a look at the sea ice. The ice, well, we do have some development in areas along the northwest coast and especially in through Kotzebue and Norton Sounds. But at this time, temperatures still have averaged a bit above normal, but we are going to see an overall cooling trend closer to normal temperatures as we go into this weekend, especially along the west side of the state. Eventually, though, next week, we do anticipate a stronger low to spin up here into the Gulf. And then there is going to be a surge of Arctic air coming in off Siberia that'll cross the Bering Sea middle of next week. And by the time we get into next weekend, we should see some much colder temperatures along the west coast, especially in through the southwest, down across the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, which will likely lead to some better ice development along these areas here next weekend. But in the meantime, we have this pattern, a low that's located late tonight, early Thursday morning in the western Gulf. This feature is going to wash out, and then we have this series of lows that are kind of strung out along a trough from the lower Bering here into the North Pacific south of the Alaska Peninsula. On Thursday, that trough or long line of lows just kind of lifts a little further northward toward the Gulf, and this will tend to spin up yet another little low here in the lower Gulf on Friday, while we have a couple of lows north of the Aleutians out here through the lower portion of the Bering Sea. And as I mentioned, by early next week, another low is going to lift out of the North Pacific and up into the Gulf, and that should be a stronger system Monday into Tuesday along the Gulf Coast with impacts there and to the Panhandle. But the marine forecast coming up on Thursday, we do anticipate southeast to south winds here, inner channels of the Panhandle, waves running 3 feet, maybe 5-6 feet here at Dixon Entrance. The outer coast, look for west-southwest winds south of Sitka to 20 knots, but more south to southeast, with some gust up to 35 knots west of Gustavus and south of Yakutat Bay, waves up that way around 10-11 feet. For Friday, look for southeast winds turning northeasterly off the British Columbia mainland, especially Stevens Passage down up toward Lynn Canal with 3-foot waves. Waves still running 6-7 feet down here south there through Dixon Entrance, and then easterly winds 20 to 25 knots. Gustavus south through Craig with waves 11-12 feet, and then northerly winds expected Yakutat Bay westward toward Cape Suckling at 20 knots and waves running right around 10-11 feet. For the northwestern Gulf on Thursday, the low pressure system is going to be in this area and weakening, but still southeasterly winds to 30 knots, Prince William Sound and outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. Waves 7 feet within the open waters there of Prince William Sound, but as high as 13 feet here in the northwest corner of the Gulf. Winds northerly upper middle Cook Inlet 10 to 15 knots, turning westerly 15 to 20 knots at the entrance of Cook Inlet. Waves 4 feet, but higher there northeast of Kodiak City at 8 feet. And then for Friday, winds across much of the region will be either out of the northeast or north. 10 knots within Prince William Sound, 2-foot waves. North winds 15 to 20 knots, upper middle Cook Inlet, 4 or 5-foot waves. And then look for east-northeast winds, 20 knots off the Kenai with waves 6-7 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Thursday, kind of a mixed bag, variable winds 10 to 15 knots, 3-foot waves within Shelikof Strait, 7 feet there southeast of Akiak, and then generally east to southeast winds along the Alaska Peninsula, 15 to 20 knots, though as high as 25 knots there north of Cold Bay, waves as high as 11 feet south of False Pass and 8 feet there north of Cold Bay, only 3 feet though within Bristol Bay. And for Friday, winds variable to northeasterly around Kodiak Island, 10 to 15 knots, waves 4 feet, Shelikof Strait. As we go down along the Alaska Peninsula, kind of a mix of winds, 10 to 15 knots, but they do pick up back toward the south-southwest at 20 to 25 knots through the lower portion of the peninsula, with waves up to 13 feet south of False Pass and up to 10, 11 feet there north of Cold Bay. The Aleutians will see gale force southwesterly winds, 35 to 45 knots or so, eastern Aleutians past Adak, and even 50-knot westerly winds west of Kiska. And we're looking at some big waves down there south of the Aleutians upwards of 30 to 40 feet, especially once you get southwest of Adak and south of Kiska. And that area of low pressure continues to track across the lower portion of the Bering Sea. Winds 25 knots, 25, 30 knots from the southwest here, the eastern Aleutians on Friday. And then look for southwest to westerly gales, 35 to 40 knots through the central Aleutians, Adak to just east of Kiska, and then turning northerly to 30 knots. And waves could still be in excess of 20 feet south of the central Aleutians across the North Pacific. Along the southwest coast, generally northeast winds around 20 knots, waves 5 feet there within Norton Sound between Nome. And then as we go down along the lower Yukon Delta, northeast winds there, 4-foot waves, 3-foot waves out of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bay, but easterly gales to 35 knots. And the Pribilof Islands, waves as high as 10, 14 feet. For Friday, a continuation of offshore flow, east-northeasterly flow, 10, 15 knots off the southwest coast. 7-foot waves within Kuskokwim Bay, 6-foot waves there, Bristol Bay, 2 to 3-foot waves from Norton Sound to off along the lower Yukon Delta, but the highest waves, St. Paul there, 16 feet, and 16 feet at St. Matthew and 13 feet in the vicinity of St. Paul and St. George. Across the north and the west Arctic regions, as we get down through the Bering Strait, winds will be out of the north-northeast, 20 to 25 knots with 4 to 5-foot waves. Lower Chukchi Sea, 20 to 25 knots south of Cape Lisburne with waves of 4 to 5 feet. A lot of ice in place along the Arctic coast. Look for generally an eastern-northeast northerly component to the wind, 15 to as high as 25 knots around Kaktovik. And then for Friday, look for winds, kind of a mixed bag. Easterly 30-knot winds there, Kaktovik. Southerly, Prudhoe Bay, 10 knots. Northeast winds, Utqiagvik down into the Chukchi Sea, 15 to 20 knots. Waves where there is still some open water, anywhere from 3 to 4, 5 feet. And look for easterly winds out of Kotzebue Sound at 25 knots. South of the Bering Strait, winds will be out of the north, as high as 30 knots there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island near Gamble, with waves as high as 5 to 6 feet.